the spiritual forum, everyone. So glad you're here. It's a great day here in Wisconsin. I'm in rural Wisconsin, and wherever you are, I hope you're having a fabulous day. This podcast is here to bring you hope and inspiration on your spiritual life and your spiritual path. And I have guests from all sorts of walks of life with all sorts of experiences of the divine and all sorts of modalities to share or just experiences to share. And I know it's all spirit inspired. And so I know there's somebody out there that's going to really benefit from today's guest. I want to remind you a few things. If you want to help out with this ministry or this podcast, feel free to donate on my website, thespiritualforum.org. And then if you want to learn about the retreat, thespiritualforum.org/retreat. Okay, let me introduce my guest. My guest today is Stephanie Serazin, and she is an experiential grief expert, research, and author. As an accidental grief researcher and experiential expert in ambiguous grief, we're going to learn about that today. Her work focuses on the process of navigating ambiguous grief, which is an emotional state that occurs with the loss of a loved one, but not the loss to physical death, when someone is still living, yet whose relationship with us has changed. I'm sure that's something that we will all identify with. After Steph's own experience with ambiguous grief, she sought out her own healing, as well as other people who shared her experience, which further led to research, discoveries, and hope, or discoveries about hope, and co-authoring the Ambiguous Grief Process Model. Steph now works to bring awareness to ambiguous grief as a nuanced, natural, and navigable response to loss. She's the founder of Rise Up Rooted Community, and her book, SoulBroken, is publishing this fall. I think it just published via Balance, an imprint of Grand Central Publishing. So welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here too. I'm really glad it worked out. And I'm really interested in learning about this because I had someone on not long ago, well, a couple months ago, and we talked about grief. And we've gone through a lot of loss in my own family and a lot of that kind of grief. But there are other kinds of grief. And I think people don't know about it. I think they feel it. They sense it. They don't understand it. And I think just naming it as you have, ambiguous grief, is really helpful. So what I'd like you to do is just kind of start off and briefly tell your story and how you got to having this specialty in ambiguous grief, and tell us about what ambiguous grief is.
Certainly. Well, thank you. To start, I will say studying ambiguous grief is nothing I ever aspired to do.
You didn't wake up. You didn't
I
say that
did
as a
not.
6-year-old, you want to do that.
What sounds like a good time? No, not at all. I went to college and studied human ecology, sociology, community programs, and continued with a master's degree in public policy. And my interests were in government organizations, in working in community organizations. And I did that for many years and enjoyed what I was doing, felt that it was making a difference for others. And a big part of my career was working with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Great feeling to go to work every day and grant wishes to kids with life-threatening medical conditions, where the mission is to bring hope, strength, and joy to a child with a life-threatening medical condition. And coming home every day, doing that work was very fulfilling, as you can imagine. And fast forward a few years, I have 3 terrific kids. I'm in a wonderful marriage, and at about close to 20 years in this relationship, I discovered that I was one-sided in thinking it was pretty wonderful. And
Okay.
discovered that my husband at the time, my former husband, was feeling differently. So, this betrayal trauma is what I've come to learn. It is called was something that was just really broke me open. It was a big surprise, and divorce soon followed. And that was 7 years ago now. looking back, Carol, it is that experience, one that at the time I would say I wished on nobody. The pain of separating from a person, from a life, from an identity, from a relationship that I so loved was painful on every level. It was painful on a cellular level, on a soul level. And I was just desperate to find my way through the pain. And
Yeah.
what I found is that nobody was talking about it. Certainly, I wasn't the only one to have a painful divorce experience. And I was really looking, asking friends or family members, who do you know? Like you might ask for a referral of any service. Who do you recommend? Is there somebody, do you know somebody I could talk with? I was really looking for, kind of a big sister type to say, yes, you're going to be okay. Here are some things to do. And that was so lofty an aspiration when I look back on it, because I couldn't even find anybody to say, yes, me too. What I came to find out eventually is that when there are experiences that we have that are attached with shame or embarrassment,
Mhm.
internalized as shame and embarrassment, we don't talk about it. And I think we don't talk about it because we don't want to be talked about.
Mhm.
So instead of sharing what was going on, um, I couldn't find others that were willing or wanted to do the same until I published an article online saying, why aren't we talking about this? And I started hearing from people from all walks of life, not just those suffering quietly in their divorce or their broken relationships, but individuals who are grieving the loss of their children to addiction, not
Mhm.
knowing where they are, wanting that child back. Some of my own peers who are grieving the loss of their parents to cognitive decline, diagnosis of Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury. I met a woman who reached out and she said, I haven't told anybody that my husband has been incarcerated for the last
Oh, yes.
2 years.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to know. And, you know, and what I began to learn is that I'm not alone. I'm certainly not alone, but that we don't, as you said, we don't recognize that our experience is grief. We don't know there's a name for it. And what I began to understand is that everybody just thinks they're really sad. Everybody just thinks that they're going through depression, or they're on an island and figuring it out on their own. But that's not the case. And my hope is that the more we are able to talk about it without shame or without embarrassment, the more others will feel more inclined to share their stories too and feel less alone um, in
So do you
in
think
whatever life gives them.
one of the problems that we have is that our society is very focused on being upbeat and things are good, and so it's hard to share difficult emotions, period, not to mention the parts that bring in shame and embarrassment?
I think so. I think that's certainly part of it, and not just that, but societally, we have the notion that things are private. There are certain
Oh,
families that are
yes.
raised with, we don't air our dirty laundry.
Yes,
This is
yes.
our family business. This stays inside the family. And, that's uh, certainly not anything I'm judging. It does, however, have issues that kind of ripple through that, right? And can leave individuals within families feeling obligated and, to the honor of their family, to staying within the family, or
Yes.
to finding help and relief for themselves. And when you speak about this, happy, uplifted society that we all live in, I think social media has done us a disservice in that vein, because we don't see our endings. on social media. We see our beginnings. And I began to learn this, right? When I was not until, and I was guilty, not until I was going through it. And I took a break from social media. And then, a year or so later, I came back on and I thought, nothing has happened to anybody. And I wasn't looking for bad things to have happened, but I was more curious to find my people because I was finding them in emails, right? I was finding them as people reached out to me or as friends, or people referred others to me, but I wasn't finding it amongst my own network, right? And again, not that I wanted to see that they were having difficulties, because some of them were, but we don't recognize it. We don't
Yeah,
talk about our endings.
I think that I think social media certainly encourages us to show our happiness, and the whole person is negated. It's like, I am this whole person. I have feelings. I have things happening to me all the time. Some are safe to share. Some don't feel safe to share. But on social media, it's like, especially with younger people, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for younger people, high school, college, where you're just really comparing your life to other people, and they're out on yachts and wherever, vacations in Mexico or whatever, and here
Right.
you're feeling really sad. So I can definitely see that's part of it. I can also see this family dynamic as part of it, or the idea that, because this isn't my family, I can feel, as you said that, I'm like, I have a pattern in my life where I handle things privately. I just do. I've got to look at that. Did I learn that from my parents? Probably, but I also think I learned it within my family, because I was kind of like the sensitive one. I was the one that cried too much or felt too much, and I was really so sad about animals, and oh, Carol's, she's so sensitive, and so I learned to defend myself by having a private world. Like like I've got something to handle. I'm not going to go. This is not about me, but there was a day in my life in first grade that I was in such a humiliating and embarrassing experience where, like, the whole class was laughing at me. And I'm bringing this up because I did not go home and say, Mom, Dad, I can't believe, you can't believe what happened to me today. I didn't. I'm like, I'm just going to handle this. I'm 6 years old. I'm just going to handle this because I don't know if it was because Carol's too sensitive or they're very busy, but I learned at a very early age just to handle my stuff. So I'm kind of
Yes.
sharing that with you. Probably the
Thank
one of your,
you. Thank you for sharing that. And
yeah.
and it is about you. It is about you. It is about your listeners who are nodding along with me as you say
Yeah.
this. And it isn't because your parents were neglectful, horrible people,
No, they were
right?
great
Well,
parents.
they're great parents, and let's give everybody just the
Yeah.
gift of the benefit, right? And but it's how we adapt and how we learn to adapt in our family units so that we can feel protected and safe. I resonate with so much of what you're saying. And for so many years, until this big grief opportunity broke me open, I was very proud of my ability to handle things on my
Uh-huh.
own and
Yeah.
to take care of business and make decisions. And um, I called it independent and well able. I am well able to do all of these things, right? What I've learned is that as we look at our family dynamics and our family of origin, that of course that's where we learn so much of it. And what do we have as contrast but the shows we might be seeing on television or the other families we see in our neighborhoods, right? We don't know the difference, and so we are taught and then we adapt. And so many families just keep things private because that's what they were taught too. And maybe they
Mhm.
were humiliated and then they decided we're going to keep things quiet because I shared and it
Didn't go
it
so
bit
well.
me. Right. So who knows?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, the way I am wired, I needed to talk to somebody who
Mhm.
understood this. I was so
Mhm.
desperate. And that's when I discovered that there are just droves of individuals who are experiencing this kind of grief. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know quite what it was. And I had this really prickly emotion that would bubble up. And it would be very present and I could feel it, but I didn't know what it was. And it's an emotion, in the way that you would know anger or depression or the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of
Right.
grief that
Mhm.
we're all familiar with. And I recognize and acknowledge that she created those stages for individuals who were dying, and later, added that it, it's it's not necessarily for uh, their family members. It can be. It was never meant to be a all encompassing. This is what you go through, and it's linear. It's not.
Right.
But I had no education on grief in public policy school, so that was all new to me, and I was trying to feel my way through it. I had grandparents who had passed on, and so I had understood grief and grieving to that level, but not to the level that I was experiencing. And what kept popping up in, anger, I'd have a day of anger and I'd be so mad. And then I'd feel depression and just cha-cha back and forth, bargaining, denial, all of these stages that a terrific therapist told me I could probably expect. But there was this one other emotion I just kept finding in myself. And as I found a group of other women with my experience, and we went through group retreats together and stayed in touch on a near daily basis for a while, I saw it in them too. And then one day, while we were all together, a year on our year anniversary of meeting, this friend group of mine, I had the what I've learned from you actually is called claircognizance. I just knew what it was. It was as though it had been downloaded into me, like we might upload our data to our operating system. We have a new operating system, and all of a sudden it's Stephanie 2.0. It's hope. There was this experience of hope. I was hoping in my grief, and what I found, Carol, is that when we lose our loved ones to a physical death, we aren't hoping that they're going to show up on our doorstep tomorrow, right?
Right.
We have an understanding of the finality of death. I'm not saying we don't grieve well. I don't believe we grieve well in our society as well as others do, and we certainly have a long runway, I think, where we could improve. But we're not hoping that our loved one is going to come back to us after they have died a physical death. And yet, when our loved ones are gone to us through a non-physical death, hope is something that is quite common because we are hoping for, a recovery from addiction. We're hoping for an apology and a, return from the spouse or an estranged family member. We're hoping for a cure for Alzheimer's or for the traumatic brain injury or cognitive decline. We're hoping for an early sentence release for our loved one. Incarceration and indoctrination is another that I found individuals were grieving. A loved one indoctrinated to a gang or a cult or
Yes, I was just
something.
thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of that. And
Yes.
then the other thing that came into my mind as you were talking, and I don't know if this fits, but if you have a child who is married and their spouse somehow draws them away from the family, would
Familial
that,
estrangement,
okay,
absolutely. And
yeah.
oh, the heartbreaking stories I've heard from individuals, and the one that comes to mind is was a grandmother, just absolutely adored her grandchildren. And then 5 years later, with two grandchildren, she was told, we can no longer see you. And when we're ready to talk to you about it, we will, but we're not ready. And she's left in grief, right?
Yeah.
Because they are there, they live across town. And so she's adapting her life to not go into the grocery store because she sees her daughter-in-law's vehicle out front, right? Or,
Wow. Yeah.
and so familial estrangement is definitely something, as I've talked with others, that, there are two sides to every story, of course. And yet, as I speak to grievers, what I find is a consistent through line is their confusion of what they've done. And something that I hear many of them say, and I actually interviewed a man, I write about him in chapter 1 of the book. He said, I know I wasn't the perfect father. Of course I made mistakes, but did I deserve this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that hope? Right. So, you know, being a grief researcher was something that happened out of my own necessity to try to understand and learn. And, you know, there's a terrific therapist. Her name is Dr. Pauline Boss. She's, I believe she's out of Minnesota. And she coined the term ambiguous loss back in the 90s as she was seeing patients whose loved ones had their physical presence was not known. So perhaps it was a loved one who had been kidnapped or swept away in a natural disaster, or
Like
a
MIA. Yeah.
soldier who's MIA, and the loss is ambiguous. So as I was trying to understand my own grief, I found her work, and it's tremendous work. And I thought, oh, this is really close. And she, you know, she later extended the definition to include a loss with a psychological presence, such as Alzheimer's. And so while her work was a great starting point for me, it didn't quite capture what I was looking for, which was somebody who had been through it, who could guide me through it in an actionable way, you know. And so that's where ultimately the ambiguous grief process model came from. I worked with a terrific therapist who's local to me to develop an assessment tool and a survey, and dug into the data with that public policy degree I wasn't using,
Oh,
and
fun.
used that knowledge to take a look at the data I had, and found how people are hoping that their loved one returns, and how long they hope is indicative of how long they'll hold their pain. That
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So you partnered with your therapist on this model. Is that correct?
Yes. So I
Okay.
had seen, she's not my primary therapist. I was referred to her for EMDR therapy,
Okay.
eye
All
movement
right.
desensitization rapid
Okay.
reprocessing. Yes, it is a tremendously helpful and horrible therapy. It is used for trauma victims. It's incredible. It's simple eye movement back and forth as you're recounting your
Your
traumatic
story.
memories.
Okay.
Yeah, and our brains reprocess. We shelve it in a different area of our brain so that we're able to think of it, to speak of it without it debilitating us. So I had gotten to a point where I was just unable to do that. And my primary therapist recommended that I see this therapist for EMDR,
Okay.
which
Interesting.
was tremendously helpful for me. And after our time together was done, I had shared with her my hypothesis about ambiguous grief, about this. My loss isn't ambiguous, but my grief is. And how do I move through it? And I've noticed this prickly thing called hope that pops up, and it's holding me back. I see it in my group, and I see it in myself. And she said, okay, I think you're onto something. I see patients daily. And that sounds very familiar. So let's partner. And so we did. And the data found exactly that. There's two different kinds of hope that an ambiguous griever may likely encounter. And hope is a great thing, don't get me
Right.
wrong.
Hope is a great thing, but I can see that if you're holding on to it in a way that you could hold on to it that could be holding you back, and that you have to release it at some point. I can see that.
Right.
Yeah,
And
and for me, I also, as a spiritual person, I also think it's good for us to always have hope for life, for life to
yes,
unfold, for love, for the world to manifest in a beautiful way. But I can see that when there's a loss, that if you're holding on to the hope of some sort of miraculous return or awakening, that it's like an arrested development. It's like it's stopping you.
that's so well said. That's so very well said. Yes. And, hope has been written about for ages because it is wonderful. It's a virtue in Catholicism. It is, oh, Emily Dickinson, hope is the thing with feathers that
Yeah.
perches in the soul and sings the tune all day long and never stops at all. And I read that through my new lens. Of course I read it before,
Sure.
and now I've read it after, and I read that and I think it is a bluebird, or it is the, like Cinderella's bluebird is hope, or it is Iago, the parrot from Lion King, just, oh my goodness, stop squawking at me. Right. And so I think that, I Pope Francis did a beautiful TED talk on hope that I recommend often. It's lovely. And so I am in no way, bearing the flag of hope is bad.
I get it.
However, I do believe that hope misdirected can be as dangerous as it is good, because when we're focused on a cure for our loved one, or we're focused on whatever our focus is that is placing hope outside of us for someone else, is meaning that we're not hoping for ourselves, right? Our energy is being directed toward another person, and we get very busy finding solutions for other people's problems
Right.
in
And it
that
seems
way.
also a trick of the ego. Like, I will be happy when this person returns, or I will be happy when this person awakes. But the truth is,
Yes,
I need to find my happiness whether or not that person does anything or not.
that's right. It is not, it is out of our control. And, the Serenity Prayer is something that, speaks to that. What to know the difference of
Yeah,
what is ours to control and what isn't. And, when we if we're not turning our hope internally, I don't believe we're giving our grief the space to transform us.
I see that. That's the quote. So far, that's the quote of the podcast.
Oh, super. And it's not really a popular opinion amongst
Yeah,
some people, because, and that's certainly fine. And perhaps they'll never need to see hope in that way, but when we're able to kind of lay down our sword and say, it's an act of love. It's an act of self-love, I believe, to say, okay, I'm going to be aware of my external hope, and I'm going to choose internal hope. And what that looks like is, so internal hope looks like I am envisioning a life for myself without that relationship as it once was. It doesn't mean that relationship won't take on a new form. It doesn't mean the person is out of your life forever. There's a myriad of ways that relationship can continue or not, but having the acceptance, finding acceptance, can then help you determine how you hope. And that hope is a slippery double agent, right?
yeah, I
Because
see that.
it can keep us cycling in between, okay, as you said, it's the ego. I'm going to go ahead and help my loved one. It's my job. And let me research all of the best doctors, and let me find the, best resources, and let me take over and make this better. But that isn't our job, and it isn't for us to do, right? So we have to, if we turn that inward and start, asking, my favorite prayer is show me, show
Yeah.
me. And so every time I sit with that prayer and I sit in that meditation, it's always about me, which is also not popular today to say it's about me, but it is,
It's always about me.
right?
It's always about me. Yeah.
But
Even
we wear a badge of selflessness, especially as popular with women, to be
yeah.
so serving of others. And yes, we all should be in service of others, but we must be in service of ourselves first, I think. And so to take care of ourselves first and kind of clean up our spiritual home and be okay with who we are in relation to our person who isn't as they once were, is really the only way forward. And we can't do that if we continue to focus outside of ourselves.
Right. And I think the focus outside of ourselves is also a trap of the ego. Like it's all out there, whether we want to help things out there, people out there, or whether we think all the problems are out there. It's like
Right.
everything is out there, but we do have to kind of let that, boomerang come back and
Right.
point at
Right.
us. I think ultimately the spiritual path is reckoning with that. I have to find a place where I am okay no matter what, no matter whether I'm in relationship with people, whether they betray me, whether they love me the way I want, whether the world is going to pot, whether the world is working in the way, whether, the politics out there is how I want it to be, no matter what is happening, the whole thing would be falling down and I'm okay. I think that's like ultimately the spiritual path, that it's me and God, or me and source, or whatever you want to say.
Yes.
But it is a trap. I'm in it all I have this idea that, not that I can control the lives of loved ones, but that I have some sort of power. Like I could, like, maybe if they just knew this.
Right. Right.
Maybe they don't know this, and if they just knew this, that could help them see that. And it's like, it's also just really a lack of faith in the universe unfolding the way it is designed to unfold. Everyone's on their path doing their own thing. Why do I think I need to intervene over there or over there? I'm really doing it because I want to feel better, I think, ultimately.
Right. And I wonder if it goes back to, and again, I'm nodding along with you. I'm laughing with you, not at
Yeah.
you, because
Yeah.
I also know the right way to do things and offer that advice to others. But I do it now with kind of a wink and a smile, because
Yeah.
my way isn't the right way. There's 100 ways through
Sure.
ambiguous grief.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
million ways through. And
Yeah.
I actually say that in my book, that this is but one way. This is the way
Right.
I traversed it. And perhaps something will spark interest for you too. But there are so many ways. And yet I wonder though about, as you shared, of your family of origin, of your 6-year-old self
Yeah.
handling the lunchroom,
Right.
fiasco on your own.
Right.
Well, so why wouldn't you offer others the right way to do things, or an insight that you might have, or a learning? You know, eh, for me, I believe that comes from my inner child. That
Right. Right.
personality, is something that I can look at and say, oh, I see how I developed this. I see why I developed that part of my
Yeah, I
personality.
think it's a part of, so it's like something like I would have had these feelings of humiliation or embarrassment or whatever. And even if it doesn't apply to another person, I can help you not feel that. Like I can save you from that.
Oh,
I think part of that is that. And although I don't think for me I'm saving people from humiliation, but I do think the energy is the same. The energy is the same. I
sure.
would love to avoid to have you feeling bad about anything, doing something that could cause you physical harm or something like that. But I also know that my ego is wrapped up in, when they're happy, I'm happy. I do know that. I do know. And I'm not talking about everyone. I'm not like a perpetual helper in the world. I'm talking about the people who are close to me, my daughters,
Sure.
and they're the ones who I think most about.
Sure. Sure.
And,
Yes.
I think there's
Eh,
this, yeah, it is interesting. I've got to look at that. I'm going to dig into this.
well, and so I ask you this because this is something I wrestled with. I'm a mother as well. I have 3 incredible children, and not so little any longer. But, you know, as a mom, wanting to save them from their pain, wanting to shield them from pain, I think is natural, of
Hmm.
course, right? We all want to do that. But at what point does it become harmful? And
Yeah.
who am I to to alleviate a situation that could have been an incredible life lesson for them, right?
Right.
So it's this fine line of rescuing, because we don't want our children to feel this way, and being able to for me, get out of my ego, recognizing it as such, because of course they're better when mom's happy, everybody's happy, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yes, same.
Right.
And
Right.
I would imagine that's probably fairly universal,
Yeah.
and yet to see mom in grief, or to see mom struggling, I think is just as valuable, maybe even
Sure.
more valuable, right? Because then you know, you see mom get through it. You model that way through.
Well, yeah, and I think I'm going to get to your model in a minute, but we're still
Sure.
psychoanalyzing me. I think when I think about it, my parents had a very good marriage. I do know that. I think they were soulmates, but they never really
Mm.
modeled conflict between them. I never saw it. So I think that was also modeled for me. You just handle it. They handled it, whatever it was, I just handle it. And
Yes.
so like you say, it's good for kids to see. I think it's good for kids to see their parents breaking down or breaking open, as you said, and feeling the grief and feeling the feelings, and that models for them that it's okay.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that we all just have to do what we feel is the next right thing to do,
Yeah.
especially if we don't know what to do, and I think some of the worst advice I was given early on in my grief was, if you're going to cry, you cry in the shower. And it wasn't a
Oh,
suggestion
wow.
either. It
Wow.
was kind of a directive. And that did not resonate with any part of me. That just, I knew that it was wrong. And I think that if we can tune into ourselves, if we can tune into our intuition and hear ourselves respond or feel ourselves respond, that can guide us to that next right thing. And for me, it wasn't to go, I would be in the shower all day. I couldn't stay in the
You run
shower
out of water.
from morning till night, right? I was crying constantly for a year. And so my children saw me cry. And when they would say, "Are you okay?" I would say, "I will be. I will be."
Oh.
And I think I know people have very strong opinions on grief and how I grieved or how they might see others grieve. If you're raised to, keep it within the family and cry in the shower, and that's a point of pride for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And
right.
I don't begrudge that in any way. That was not my experience. And my understanding is that hiding our emotions can be detrimental
Oh,
uh,
yeah, it's
to
a
our
whole
kids.
shadow thing. We
Right.
keep all that down, and we don't hide them. It comes out in different ways. We just project it onto someone
Yes.
else. Yeah.
Good
So
point.
so where so I'm really kind of interested in what you see your mission in life is, but and what do you do? Like, are you
Mhm.
helping people through this ambiguous grief, or I know you have some ambiguous grief model, but
Mhm.
let's just say I'm going through this. What do I do?
Right. So for me, I wrote the book that I wish I would have had all those years ago. And, it's a guidebook for somebody to work through individually if they would like. It's also, there's a book club discussion guide. If,
Okay.
perhaps you're, as I was at one point, in a group with others all over the country. And this would be something we would work through together, and come back and share every week where we are in the process. And just interestingly, I'd like to add that the designers, the cover design came back beautifully for the book, looking like uh, watermarks all over, these paint marks. What is the word? The watercolors, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
and because ambiguous grief is so hard to define, it's different for everybody, kind of like just
Sure.
the watercolor. But I asked them if they could put a path through it, right? Because I believe we're all on a spiritual path, whether we're aware of that or not.
Right.
And if we are willing to allow grief to be a portal to our greatest and highest selves, I think that it can move us forward on our path of humanity. And, um, so that's something I talk about with individuals. I ended up doing grief certification classes through two different organizations as people were coming back to tell me about their grief and their experiences. I didn't feel that I was equipped to best help them. And so I got myself certified with the Grief Recovery Institute, which works through a very specific model of grief, of an individual's grief with one person. And then the David Kessler grief certification as well. And David Kessler worked, you can find him on grief.com. He worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross toward the end of her life and is just a wealth of information. So I am doing one-on-one grief education. I have grief workshops that I'll be starting in January, and
Okay.
group facilitation, grief group facilitation as well. And, my hope is that as we talk about grief, that is different than grief to death, more people will feel more comfortable sharing their losses and recognizing that, grief is nothing to hide from or be embarrassed or ashamed about. Grief is the invoice you get from love, right? It
It sure
is.
is. Yeah, it
We
is. It
grieve
is.
because we love deeply, and
Mhm.
and I how
Mhm.
lucky that we should know grief. It means only that we know great love.
Mhm. I think that's beautiful. And I think of you mentioned about other cultures early on. As other cultures, I mean, you see them when they lose a person. I'm talking about physical grief, physical
Mm,
loss, they're wailing and, all of this emotion. And then, you go to a funeral in our country and there are people crying kind of quietly or whatever. And there's this whole process you go through, but there's not this guttural wailing that goes on,
right.
and which may have
Ugh.
been what you did for a year, not in the shower, but
Mhm.
it is part of being human. It is part of being human, and when you tell your story in the beginning, I was what came to me is that like everything, your marriage breaking up, you're having the betrayal trauma, like all of this was just, breaking you said you broke yourself open, or broke you open. All of this was just preparing you for this part of your life. Like there's a divine hand in this whole thing. Not, I don't really believe in everything's preordained and everything's decided, but that somehow this all of this came to you, and that you're able now to go through your process and then use it for good. You're using it for good. I call it a ministry. You may not want to call it a ministry. Whatever it is, it's a life calling that you're
Mhm.
answering now to help people with something that's so prevalent in our society that is kind of left unnamed. So it all seems like a God thing to me.
Thank you. I know that it is,
Yeah.
for me, and that's not something I would have said, without this experience. Days before the discovery, I was talking to a dear friend on our daily morning call, and I said to her, "I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm called to write a book. Do you have any idea what it would be about?" And she said, "No." "Do you mean like a novel?" And I said, "I don't think it's a novel, but I need to get quiet. I need to get quiet." And she said, "Ask, show me. Pray, make that your prayer." And I said, "Okay, I will." Days later, um, everything began
Everything broke
to
open.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately, as I said at the beginning of our talk, this was no place I ever aspired to be. And yet, I feel so divinely led to this very moment, and I trust the unfolding every single day. I have seen my life nudged and nudged and nudged in so many ways that can be nothing other than divine. I see it and say thank you. Even if I don't like it, I now say, "Oh, okay, thank you, thank you."
Right.
I see it.
Right.
I see what I'm being given, and it's my choice. It's all of us. It's a choice for all of us. When when the divine is speaking to us in whatever way the divine or name the divine, I believe that the divine is speaking to us all of the time.
Me
And
too.
unless we can get quiet and listen and be a vessel to digest it, um, we're not we're not living in present awareness of what we're hearing, whether it's through an individual, a stranger, an experience, an animal, nature, where it's always there. And um, I'm so grateful that grief ultimately gave me this beautiful gift of awareness.
Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? I just think that's so cool because I mean, God does work in interesting ways. And we're always, when something bad happens, for the first thing is like, why me? Why me? What? I just spoke with a person a couple of days ago on my podcast, and she had heart and kidney transplant, and she was faced with, why me? I'm a good person. Why me? And that's a first resistance. And then something absolutely wonderful and beautiful came through that for her. And this is the coolest thing about spirit, about the spiritual life, about just releasing our attachment for how things should show up, how things should look. And, we think we get on a roller coaster and we're going to ride that roller coaster throughout life and it's going to take us back. And then we kind of, get off the roller coaster and that's death. But I mean, we're always getting on and off different rides. Different rides.
Always.
The ride will stop and it's like, oh, it's going in reverse now. I'm like, whoa, that's not what I
Right, buckle
expected.
up.
Right, buckle
Exactly.
up. Yeah.
And I think if we're willing to bend, just bend to it without resisting it, lean
Yeah.
into it a little bit, and really trust the unfolding. There's so much to be learned, but everything is so noisy today.
Yeah.
And we have so much coming at us from all the different angles of, what, like we said, happiness and what it should be. And I think we miss a big part of the human experience if we don't take all of it, right? Take the
Yeah.
rest of it. That isn't so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful in a different way.
It's not like
Mhm.
we're at a restaurant. I'm going to say I only want that and I only want that. It's like, oh, no, you got the whole menu.
Right, absolutely. And how lucky are we truly? My greatest teacher in life, I always say this, is my brother, who's 2 years younger than I am, and he's never spoken a word. He was born severely multiply disabled. He's never taken a step. He's never said a word. My parents continue to care for him today. And when you love an individual who is so, I don't say he's disabled, say he's differently abled.
Uh-huh.
Growing up, he has taught me so much. There's no we're all if we're going to say disabled, then we're all disabled, right? In our own ways.
That's true.
But we are all able in our own ways. And he is well able, without speaking, to be an incredible model for compassion, right? Just in his existence. And even though that has been woven into the fabric of my life and my sister's life, and my parents and anybody who meets him or anybody similar to my brother, it was this experience of grief that brought me back to that which had already been planted in me, which is just this lack of other, right? We are all connected. We are the betrayal trauma that I experienced is now as it was the day before that devastation, filled with love. You can't just flip on love, and you can't flip it off either. Well, I mean, turn it off like a light switch, not flip
I
it off.
understand.
Right, but you can, but
You
that's really
can't
not
flip it off.
unfolding for your greatest
turn it
and
off.
highest good. That wouldn't be your greatest good, right? But and so having compassion for others who are not in our lives as they once were, is also giving compassion for ourselves. And my brother taught me that, and I'm continuing to learn every day through my grief that that's something we can always access if we're willing to shut down our ego and try.
Yeah. Another thing that came to me is this recent way families are cutting each other off with, things like how they view COVID, and are you vaccinated or unvaccinated, and can you come home for Thanksgiving? Can you not? And our home our Thanksgiving home was anybody who wants to come can come. If your family's not letting you come home. But that's another thing that we're doing to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're dividing amongst our own tribes, our own units, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
what? For ego. Really, it comes down to, as I'm sure you've you've talked about at some point, fear or love. And when everything is deduced down, are we acting out of fear or are we acting out of love? And every time I ask myself that question is not when I'm acting out of love. Like when I ask myself that question, I am already rolling my eyes at myself
Yeah.
because, okay, wait a minute. No, I'm behaving this way because I'm acting out of, as Gary Zukav says, a scared part of my personality,
Yes.
which is fear. I'm acting out of fear. I don't want to act out of fear. I want to take away that ego. Everybody can have their own opinions on everything. So
Right. Me too. It's so important that this is a little separate than your ambiguous grief, but it is so important that we do what we can to maintain our connections. Now, I'm not saying if it's like a divorce or Alzheimer's or something that you're going to maintain the same connections, but I'm talking about these other things where we are having these artificial boundaries where we're cutting each other off. Very important to not to stay as connected as we can to people, because that energy is going to be what shifts the world and stops all this division.
amen. Yes, absolutely. And that is a through line through your podcast, through the conversations you're having, is that connectedness. And I believe that. I wear a shirt that says we're all connected. I believe it so deeply. I know it deeply. It's more than believing it. I know it.
It's
We are all connected.
claircognizance.
It is claircognizance, a word I learned recently. But the title of my book is SoulBroken, and it came to me in work I was doing with a shaman, and then the next week a friend said the word, and I thought, what? What? Right?
Yeah.
Both of these words within a week of each other, and I'd never heard the word SoulBroken in my life. And as I wrote about it, I defined it in as a disconnection from self. It's more than to be heartbroken, which is, we all
Heartbroken.
experienced heartbreak in our life. Yeah, our dog ran away, our boyfriend broke up with us, or disappointments, heartbreak. We've all had heartbreak, and it's hard. Yet to be soul broken is to be filled with anguish that is onset by the loss of our love, our relationship. And it's often void of validation. But at its core, to be soul broken is to be disconnected from ourselves and from our connection to the divine and one another.
Yes.
And I think that is why grief is a terrific portal to help us reconnect to ourselves, to the divine, and to one another. And so I hope more people start talking about grief, not in a way that speaks of recovery, in a way to, recover from grief and cover up, but to regenerate.
Something they want to be finished with. I love this. Grief is a portal. Grief is a portal. I love that idea. And
I believe it's true.
With several grieving people now, grieving for actual physical loss, but grief is a portal, and it's a portal so is it a portal for our soul to heal?
It's a portal I believe it is a portal for knowing our greatest and highest self.
Okay.
It is a portal to the best us as we are created to be. It is it is to truly know your soul, that ever present, everlasting, and we can hide from it because it's painful. Grief is so painful. I think language can also help by just tweaking our language a little bit, from passing away to passing on. They're not gone, they've gone on.
Yes.
And from recovery, and when you look at the etymology of the word recovery, I don't want to recover my grief. I thought I did until I was writing the book and taught and started really learning where the word recovery came from. And embarrassment was built into the etymology. And I thought, well, I'm not embarrassed of my grief. And then I thought, again, claircognizance, I'm regenerating. This is new. This is the genesis. I aspire to regenerate as a greater and higher version of myself. And shouldn't we all, right? So instead of turning away from our grief, I hope others might see it from a new lens and be proud of their grief, embrace their grief, and allow it space to transform them. to take it as that portal.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love the term regeneration. So I know we need to wrap up. I know you've got a back end. Is there anything else that you want to share with people? I can give you the last word. I will say to my listeners, I haven't read your book yet. It's just come out. So I am looking forward to taking a look at it when you send me a copy. But it is I love the cover. It's beautiful. And I like the title as well. So I'll
Thank
give you
you.
the last word and then we can close.
Well, just thank you for having me, truly. The book is in my hands, but it will not be on shelves until October 11th.
Okay, well, that's
So
pretty soon though.
it's pretty soon. So however that might, it's available for pre-order now, but yes,
Okay.
it will be available for everybody on shelves October 11th. And thank you for the opportunity just to be in conversation with you and for the work you're doing to bring my favorite topic, spirituality and the human experience. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you
I
for
think so
allowing
too.
me to come in conversation with you about it. And my hope is that this has reached somebody who feels less alone in their ambiguous grief.
Yes.
And for that, I'm so grateful for the opportunity that we were able to connect and for you giving me that time.
Yeah, me too. And I do think this is something that is probably universal, it's probably universal. And I know somebody is going to be very blessed by the book and by the work you've done. And for you saying yes to the calling, saying yes to the calling when spirit tapped on you, you're like, okay,
Oh,
this is where I'm
thank you
going.
for honoring that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie.
I appreciate you, Carol. Take care. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all the listeners. I now close the spiritual forum.